"Move it, old man, you're holding up the whole hallway." Katie Morrison heard the shove before she saw it. The wet, ugly sound of an aide's hand catching an elderly resident's arm too hard, yanking him forward toward the dining hall while his wool scarf twisted tight around his throat. She was 3 doors down adjusting another resident's wheelchair, and she was moving before she'd fully decided to. "Hey," she said, sharp enough to cut through the hallway's fluorescent hum. "Let go of him." The 2 aides, Katie recognized them vaguely, new hires Diane had brought on the past month, turned with matching expressions of irritation, like she'd interrupted something routine instead of something cruel. "He's not moving fast enough," one of them said. "We've got 6 more residents to get to dinner." "Then be patient with him," Katie said, already crossing the distance, already reaching for the old man's twisted scarf before either aide could object. "He's not cargo." She worked the wool loose from around his throat with careful, practiced fingers, straightening it gently, watching his labored breathing ease as the pressure released. "Are you hurt?" she asked him quietly. "Just tired," the old man said, voice thin but steady. "They're always in such a hurry." "You don't have to be," Katie said, kneeling to his eye level, ignoring the 2 aides still hovering with visible impatience. "Nobody's dinner is worth rushing you into pain." She didn't see the man standing in the hallway's far doorway, composed, still, watching every second of the exchange with an expression that had gone from casual observation to something considerably sharper. He'd come for an unannounced visit. Something about this facility had felt wrong for weeks. Vague complaints from his father that he'd dismissed as ordinary confusion, small bruises he'd assumed came from clumsy falls. Watching 2 aides yank his own father down a hallway by the arm, watching a stranger step in without a second's hesitation while trained staff simply hurried past, told him exactly how wrong his instincts had actually been. Katie finished straightening the scarf and looked up at the 2 aides directly. "He deserves patience," she said. "Not shoving. If I see this again I'll report it. Both of you." The aides exchanged an uneasy glance and moved on without further argument, leaving Katie alone with the old man in the quiet hallway. She had no idea the man watching from the doorway was his son. She had no idea that Son controlled one of Boston's most feared organizations, or that her simple, unhesitating defense of a stranger's dignity had just changed the entire course of both their lives. "Thank you," the old man said, patting her hand with trembling fingers. "Nobody's spoken to them like that in weeks." Weeks. Katie's stomach tightened. "This has been happening for weeks?" The old man's eyes drifted, something guarded crossing his weathered face. "It's nothing. I don't want to cause trouble." "It's not nothing," Katie said firmly. "And you're not causing trouble by wanting to be treated with basic respect." She had no way of knowing, helping him settle back into his wheelchair, that the composed stranger still watching from the hallway's far end had just made a decision that would upend her entire career within the week. Katie Morrison was 24 years old, and the per diem shifts she picked up at Brookline Senior Living represented a considerably shakier version of the steady career she'd built and then lost within the past year. She'd worked full-time at Boston General as a certified nursing assistant for 2 years before budget cuts eliminated her position entirely, leaving her scrambling between temporary assignments at facilities across the city, never quite certain from one week to the next how many hours she'd actually get. Her financial pressure was constant and specific. Rent on a small studio apartment in Jamaica Plain, student loans from her CNA certification, and the particular exhaustion of never knowing whether a given month's income would actually cover both. Her personal goal, held close and rarely discussed with the other per diem staff who cycled through Brookline's hallways, was to eventually save enough to pursue her LPN license, a credential that would finally give her the stability and respect her current patchwork career never quite provided. Her emotional wound ran deep and specific. Her own grandmother had spent her final 2 years in an underfunded nursing facility, and Katie had watched, powerless and 17, as overworked staff rushed through her grandmother's care with a brusqueness that had stripped away her dignity long before her body finally gave out. She'd promised herself, sitting beside her grandmother's hospital bed during those final difficult months, that she would never become the kind of caregiver who treated vulnerable people as inconvenient obstacles rather than human beings deserving patience. Her moral boundary was simple and unbending. She refused to look away when someone vulnerable was being mistreated, regardless of whether it was technically her assigned resident, regardless of what speaking up might cost her in a workplace where per diem staff were easily replaced. Her practical skill, sharpened through years of hands-on elder care, was a careful, observant attentiveness to the small physical signs most people missed. A bruise that didn't match its stated cause, a medication schedule that didn't quite add up, the subtle difference between an elderly resident's natural confusion and something considerably more concerning. The recurring object at the center of her attention that week was the old man's woolen scarf, a soft, hand-knit thing clearly old and cherished, that she found herself straightening every time she passed his room, an unconscious habit that had nothing to do with her actual assignment and everything to do with the quiet, unspoken promise she'd made him in that hallway. The week before the scarf incident, Katie had stayed 90 minutes past the end of her shift, unpaid, sitting with a frightened resident who'd become disoriented and anxious after a medication change, patiently talking her through the confusion until her breathing steadied and she finally drifted into peaceful sleep. Nobody had asked Katie to do that. She'd done it because leaving someone frightened and alone, when she had the power to prevent it, felt like exactly the kind of failure she'd promised herself she'd never allow. That same instinct, immediate, protective, entirely without calculation, was exactly what sent her crossing a hallway to intervene in a stranger's rough treatment, without a single thought toward who might be watching or what her intervention might unravel. Finishing her shift that evening, Katie found herself troubled by the old man's admission that the rough handling had been happening for weeks, that he hadn't wanted to cause trouble by mentioning it. She'd seen enough of Brookline's daily operations over her 3 weeks there to have noticed other small, unsettling details. Supply closets that seemed perpetually understocked, staff turnover that felt unusually high, a general sense of rushed, careless efficiency that prioritized speed over actual care. She made a mental note to document what she'd witnessed properly, through the facility's official channels, the moment her next shift began. She had no idea, walking to her car in Brookline's parking lot that evening, that a composed, powerful stranger had watched the entire hallway confrontation from a doorway 20 feet away, or that her name was about to become considerably more important to him than she could have possibly imagined. Her phone buzzed as she reached her car. A text from her scheduling coordinator. "Can you take on room 214 as a regular assignment starting next week? The family specifically requested you." Katie frowned at the message, uncertain why any resident's family would specifically request a per diem aide they'd never officially met. She had no idea yet exactly whose father occupied room 214, or how completely that simple scheduling request was about to change everything about her careful, exhausting life. Vincent Lombardi returned to Brookline Senior Living 3 days later, this time announced, this time walking through the front entrance with the composed, deliberate authority of a man accustomed to rooms adjusting around his presence. Katie recognized him immediately from the hallway doorway, though she hadn't known his name until the facility's administrator introduced them nervously outside room 214. "Mr. Lombardi has requested you specifically as his father's primary aide," the administrator said, visibly eager to please. "I understand you two haven't formally met." "We haven't," Vincent said, studying Katie with an intensity that made her instinctively straighten under his attention. "But I watched you defend my father in that hallway 3 days ago. I wanted to meet the person who did that." Katie's stomach dropped with sudden understanding. "He's your father. The gentleman with the scarf." "Frank Lombardi," Vincent said. "Yes." Katie studied him, composed, careful, radiating an authority that felt entirely out of place against the facility's ordinary fluorescent-lit hallway. "I did what anyone should have done," she said. "He was being handled roughly. That's not acceptable regardless of who's watching." "Most people don't do what anyone should do," Vincent said. "Most people look away because getting involved is inconvenient, or because they're worried about consequences to their own position." "I don't have the luxury of looking away," Katie said. "Not when someone's being hurt in front of me." Something shifted behind Vincent's composed expression, genuine consideration, then a kind of careful, unguarded respect. "That's exactly why I want you assigned to my father's care going forward," he said. "Formally through proper channels, not as a personal favor." Katie hesitated, wariness sharpening despite her curiosity. "I appreciate that. But I need to understand why this matters so much to you specifically. Most families don't personally request per diem staff after a single hallway observation." Vincent was quiet for a moment, weighing how much to share. "Because in 3 weeks of visits, you're the first staff member I've watched treat my father like a person instead of a burden," he said. I placed him here 8 months ago, trusting this facility's reputation without vetting it as carefully as I should have. Watching what happened in that hallway confirmed something I've been suspecting for weeks. That trust was misplaced. What have you noticed? Katie asked, genuine professional concern cutting through her wariness. Bruises he can't fully explain, Vincent said. Confusion about medication schedules that don't match what I understood his prescriptions to be. Small things individually dismissible. Together considerably more concerning. Katie's own professional instincts sharpened immediately. I've noticed some of that too, she admitted. I was planning to document it properly through the facility's reporting system. Then you understand exactly why I want you specifically caring for him, Vincent said. Someone who actually notices and actually acts on what she notices. Katie considered his careful, direct explanation, weighing genuine professional concern against her instinctive wariness about accepting a wealthy stranger's sudden, specific favor. I'll take the assignment, she said finally. But I need you to understand something. I'm not accepting special treatment beyond what the job actually requires. I'll care for your father exactly the way I'd care for any resident who needed patient, attentive help. That's exactly what I'm asking for, Vincent said, something like genuine relief in his controlled voice. Their conversation was interrupted by Frank Lombardi's voice calling weakly from inside his room. Vincent? Is that you out there? Vincent's composed exterior softened instantly, genuine warmth breaking through as he moved toward his father's doorway. Katie followed, watching the powerful, controlled man transform, kneeling beside his father's chair with careful, unhurried tenderness. I'm here, Dad, Vincent said. I brought someone I think you'll like having around more regularly. Frank's eyes found Katie, recognition and genuine warmth crossing his weathered face. The scarf girl, he said, something almost like delight in his thin voice. Katie, she said, smiling despite herself. I'm going to be your regular aide going forward if that's all right with you. More than all right, Frank said, patting her hand with the same trembling fingers from 3 days earlier. Vincent watched the exchange with something unreadable moving behind his composed expression. Genuine gratitude and something considerably more complicated underneath it. I need to ask you something else, he said, once Frank had drifted into a light doze in his chair. Privately, if you don't mind stepping into the hallway. Katie followed him out, wary of curiosity building. The bruising, the medication discrepancies, Vincent said quietly. I want you to document everything carefully going forward. Not just for my father specifically. I have reason to believe this might be happening to other residents too. That's a serious accusation, Katie said carefully. I'm not making an accusation yet, Vincent said. I'm asking you to help me understand whether my suspicion is actually accurate, through careful, professional documentation rather than assumption. Katie studied him, weighing the request seriously. I can do that, she said finally. But if I find something concerning, I'm reporting it through proper channels. Not to you privately. To the facility's actual oversight structure. That's exactly what I want, Vincent said. I have no interest in handling this quietly if something's genuinely wrong here. He had no idea yet exactly how quickly that careful professional documentation would draw dangerous, unwanted attention, or how completely it would connect back to a scheme considerably more calculated than either of them yet understood. Katie's careful documentation, conducted over the following 2 weeks as Frank Lombardi's regular aide, revealed a pattern considerably more troubling than isolated rough handling. She noted discrepancies in the medication administration logs. Doses recorded as given that didn't match what she'd actually observed being dispensed. She noted supply shortages that seemed to coincide suspiciously with specific staff members' shifts. She noted, most concerning of all, bruising patterns on multiple residents that matched the same rough handling she'd witnessed in that first hallway confrontation. She submitted her observations through the facility's official incident reporting system, carefully, professionally, exactly as her training required. Within days her hours were cut in half. I don't understand, Katie told the scheduling coordinator, staring at her drastically reduced shift assignments. I was just assigned to Mr. Lombardi's care specifically. Why am I suddenly getting fewer hours? Budget adjustments, the coordinator said, not meeting her eyes directly, discomfort evident in her voice. I don't have more detail than that. Katie's stomach tightened with sudden, sharp suspicion. She called Vincent immediately. They cut my hours, she said. Right after I submitted my reports. That's not a coincidence. Vincent's response was instant, controlled fury evident in his voice. I'll look into it. He did, and what he found confirmed exactly the suspicion Katie had voiced. Diane Kessler, the facility's shift supervisor, had personally flagged Katie's hours for reduction, citing vague performance concerns that existed nowhere in Katie's actual employment file. She's trying to push you out, Vincent told Katie, finding her outside the facility after her shortened shift ended. Before your documentation goes any further. Why would a shift supervisor care that much about my reports? Katie asked. I don't know yet, Vincent admitted. But I intend to find out. The external consequence of Vincent's growing involvement became visible within days. His cousin, Angela, who managed the family's legitimate construction business, confronted him directly, visible concern in her expression. People are asking why you're personally investigating a nursing home's internal staffing issues, Angela said. It's drawing attention, Vincent. If whoever's actually responsible for whatever's happening realizes how much weight you're putting behind this AIDS reports, that puts her in a considerably more exposed position than she currently understands. I'm aware of that risk, Vincent said. I'm not willing to leave her unprotected because addressing it draws attention. The danger sharpened considerably faster than either anticipated. Diane Kessler, apparently sensing that her interference with Katie's hours hadn't fully resolved the threat, escalated further, filing a formal complaint against Katie alleging patient neglect, a fabrication so thoroughly detailed it threatened not just Katie's position at Brookline, but her entire CNA certification. This is completely false, Katie said, staring at the formal complaint with disbelief and fury tangled together. I've never neglected a single resident in my entire career. This alleges I left Mr. Lombardi unattended for over an hour during a documented shift. I know, Vincent said, his composed exterior cracking into something considerably more alarmed. I checked the actual shift logs. You were in his room the entire time this complaint claims you weren't. Then why would she file something so easily disproven? Katie asked. Because she's not actually trying to make the complaint stick, Vincent said slowly, understanding dawning with visible, cold clarity. She's trying to get you fired before anyone bothers checking the actual logs closely enough to disprove it. A pending complaint alone might be enough to end your employment here, regardless of whether it's ultimately proven false. Katie's fear sharpened into genuine alarm. I need this job. I can't afford to lose my certification over a fabricated complaint. You won't, Vincent said firmly. I'm not willing to let that happen. I don't want a payout to disappear quietly, Katie said, reading something in his careful tone that suggested exactly that kind of resolution. I want to stay in this role. I want to finish documenting whatever's actually happening here, properly through legitimate channels. Vincent studied her, something like genuine respect moving behind his composed expression. I wasn't offering a payout, he said. I was going to suggest moving forward with a formal investigation with your position protected throughout. But I appreciate you making the terms clear regardless. Then let's do that, Katie said. Properly. Whatever it actually takes. That evening, reviewing the shift logs alongside Vincent's own private investigators, Katie found herself increasingly drawn into the practical work of tracing exactly how deep Diane Kessler's interference actually ran. Look at this, she said, pointing to a series of supply order discrepancies spanning months. Medication counts that don't match actual prescriptions dispensed consistently, going back at least 6 months before I ever started working here. Vincent studied the pattern with sharpening attention. That's not a recent scheme, he said. That's something considerably more established. Diane's been a shift supervisor for almost 3 years, Katie said. If this has been happening for 6 months at minimum, that's a significant amount of money or medication or both unaccounted for. We need proof solid enough that it can't simply be buried or dismissed, Vincent said, jaw tightening with controlled fury. Real proof, not just suspicious patterns. Katie nodded, already reaching for her own careful, detailed notes. I've been documenting everything since that first hallway incident, she said. Every discrepancy, every bruise, every medication count that didn't add up. If we cross-reference it against pharmacy records properly, I think we'll find exactly what's actually been happening here. Whatever they found, Katie understood with sudden sinking clarity, was about to put both of them in considerably more danger than a reduced shift schedule and a fabricated complaint. Vincent insisted, once the fabricated complaint escalated into genuine safety concerns, that Katie relocate temporarily to a protected apartment near his own estate while the investigation continued, an arrangement Katie accepted only after negotiating firm terms. "I keep my position at Brookline," she said. "I'm not disappearing from this investigation, and I'm not letting Diane win by scaring me away from your father's care." "Agreed," Vincent said without hesitation. "Whatever you need." Scene 1 came the next morning, practical and immediate. Katie found Vincent reviewing pharmacy records at the apartment's small kitchen table, cross-referencing dates with visible, exhausted focus. "You don't have to do this personally," she said, settling across from him with her own coffee. "You have people for this." "I want to understand exactly what happened to my father," Vincent said. "Not second-hand summaries. The actual details." Katie glanced at the documentation, her own careful, detail-oriented training surfacing instinctively. "May I look? I know his actual prescribed schedule better than anyone reviewing this from the outside would." Vincent slid the records toward her, and Katie spent the following hour cross-referencing dates and dosages with the same methodical precision she brought to every shift. "This is worse than I thought," she said finally, pointing to a specific stretch of months. During this period, the pharmacy records show consistent full-dose deliveries, but the administration logs show partial doses given, with no documented reason for the reduction. "That's not a clerical error. That's someone diverting medication." Vincent's jaw tightened. "Diverting it where?" "I don't know yet," Katie admitted. "But it explains the missing medications and possibly the neglect too, if staff were stretched too thin covering for whatever Diane's actually doing with the diverted supplies." Scene 2 arrived 3 days later, an argument sharper than either expected. Vincent announced, over a quiet dinner, that he wanted Katie to step back from active investigation entirely, given how dangerous Diane's escalation had already proven. "Absolutely not," Katie said immediately. "I'm the one who actually understands the medical documentation. You need me for this to actually work." "Katie, she's already tried to end your career with a fabricated complaint. If she realizes how close you are to exposing the full scheme. Then we address that specific risk directly, but you don't get to sideline me because you're worried," she said, voice rising with genuine frustration. "I've spent my entire career being the person who notices what everyone else misses. I am not going to stop now, right when it actually matters most." Vincent sat back, absorbing the force of it, and for the first time actually paused instead of immediately defending his position. "You're right," he said finally. "Tell me what would actually work instead." Katie's anger softened at the honesty. "Increase security around me specifically. Don't take away my role in actually solving this." "Done," Vincent said, meaning it. Scene 3 came on the 7th night, when Katie found him alone on the apartment's small balcony, a glass of scotch he wasn't drinking held loosely in one hand. "I placed my father in that facility 8 months ago," Vincent said, before she'd even asked what was on his mind. "After my mother died, he couldn't manage alone anymore, and I told myself Brookline's reputation meant he'd be properly cared for. I didn't visit as often as I should have in those first few months. I was consumed with business, telling myself I was providing for him by staying focused on the empire that pays for his care, instead of actually being present enough to notice something was wrong. That's not an easy thing to carry," Katie said, sitting down beside him. "Watching you defend him in that hallway, a complete stranger who noticed what I should have caught months earlier, it's made me confront exactly how much I've prioritized building and protecting this family's business interests over actually being present for the people that business is supposed to be providing for," Vincent said. "I understand carrying guilt about not noticing something sooner," Katie said quietly. "I watched my grandmother's care decline for months before I understood how serious it actually was, because I trusted the facility's reputation the same way you trusted Brookline's. It took me years to understand that trust without actual attention isn't really protection at all." He looked at her, something raw and unguarded moving across his face. "You keep finding exactly the thing I need to hear." "I've had a lot of practice with complicated guilt," Katie said simply. They sat in silence that wasn't uncomfortable, the city lights spreading beyond the balcony, and something passed between them that wasn't yet spoken but was undeniably present. Two people who'd both learned, through different kinds of failure, exactly how much courage genuine attentiveness actually required. It was Marco, Vincent's head of security, who broke the moment, appearing at the balcony door, tablet in hand, expression tight. "Vincent," he said. "We finally cross-referenced the full pharmacy discrepancy against Diane Kessler's personal financial records. There's something worth seeing." Katie's brow furrowed, following them inside. Marco displayed bank statements alongside the medication logs, and Katie's practiced eye immediately caught the pattern. "She's been selling the diverted medication," Katie said slowly, studying the timeline. "These deposits match almost exactly with the specific dates medication counts came up short. This isn't just cost-cutting or neglect from being overwhelmed. This is deliberate theft, systematically for months." Marco's expression sharpened. "And your father's rough treatment, the bruising you documented, that lines up with the same periods when Diane's staff was stretched thinnest covering for her diversions." Vincent's posture went rigid, understanding settling cold and absolute. "She's been sacrificing actual patient care to protect her theft scheme." Whatever fragile calm they'd built over the past week had just shifted into something considerably more consequential. The following afternoon, working through the accumulated evidence with Vincent's investigators, Katie found herself troubled by something else entirely. "If Diane realizes we've traced this to her financial records," she said slowly, "she's not going to just accept exposure quietly. She's already tried getting me fired through a fabricated complaint. What happens when a fabricated complaint isn't enough to stop this anymore?" Vincent's expression darkened. "Then we need to move faster than she can escalate." "I want to be part of formally presenting this evidence," Katie said. "Not hidden away while you and your investigators handle it. My documentation is what actually connects the pattern. I should be the one explaining it." "That puts you directly in Diane's path," Vincent said carefully. "I'm already in her path," Katie said. "I have been since that first hallway. I'd rather face this directly than wait for her next attempt to happen somewhere I don't see coming." The formal presentation of evidence was scheduled for the following week, arranged through Brookline's ownership group and state licensing oversight, Katie's careful documentation forming the backbone of a case that had grown considerably beyond a single fabricated complaint. Diane Kessler, apparently understanding exactly how thoroughly her scheme had been exposed, moved fast. Katie received an anonymous, chilling voicemail 2 nights before the scheduled hearing. "You should have minded your own business. This isn't over just because you think you have proof." Katie's hands shook as she played it for Vincent. "She's threatening me directly now." "Then we move the timeline up," Vincent said, voice going cold and absolute. "I want this resolved before she has time to attempt anything further." That evening, Vincent gathered his senior associates, laying out the full situation. The medication diversion, the financial evidence, the escalating threats against Katie's safety. Brookline's ownership group has been a stable investment relationship for this family for nearly a decade, Enzo Bellandi, one of Vincent's senior advisors, said carefully. "Exposing this scheme publicly doesn't just end Diane's employment. It invites scrutiny onto the entire facility's operations, potentially damaging a business relationship that's provided consistent returns for years." "I know," Vincent said. "I'm doing it anyway." "Why?" Enzo pressed. "You could quietly ensure Diane's removal, handle this privately, and protect the underlying investment relationship. Because Diane sacrificed vulnerable residents' actual care and safety to protect her own theft scheme," Vincent said. "Because she's now threatening an innocent woman who did nothing except notice what should have been caught months ago by people who actually paid to catch it. I'm not interested in protecting an investment relationship with an ownership group that let this kind of neglect flourish unchecked for months, possibly years." Katie, listening from the doorway, stepped forward. "I want to be present for the formal hearing," she said. "Not hidden away for my own protection. My testimony needs to be direct, not filtered through anyone else's account." "Katie, Diane already threatened you directly," Vincent said. "Standing up publicly against her carries real risk." "Staying quiet carries risk too," Katie said. "For every other resident she's still neglecting to protect her scheme. I'm not interested in hiding from this." Vincent studied her, torn between every protective instinct he had and the plain truth of what she'd said. "If you're there," he said finally, You stay under full security before, during, and after. No exceptions. Agreed, Katie said, her voice steadier than she felt. The confrontation happened faster than anyone anticipated. The night before the scheduled hearing, working a final shift to check on Frank before the investigation's public phase began, Katie found herself cornered in Brookline's supply closet by Diane herself. The shift supervisor's earlier careful composure completely collapsed into something considerably more desperate. You have no idea what you've actually done, Diane said, blocking the narrow closet's only exit. Years of careful management, and you destroy it over some old man's scarf and a few missing pills. I destroyed it because you were stealing medication from vulnerable people who trusted this facility to care for them, Katie said, backing carefully against the shelving, calculating distance the same way she'd learned to during years of managing difficult, unpredictable situations. That's not on me. That's entirely on you. I needed the money, Diane said, desperation cracking through her earlier cruelty. My son's medical bills, my own debt. You have no idea what kind of pressure I was under. That doesn't justify neglecting the people you were responsible for protecting, Katie said. Whatever pressure you were under, you chose to make vulnerable, defenseless people pay for it. Something in Diane's expression flickered, genuine panic warring with cornered desperation. Her hand moved toward a nearby supply cart, fingers closing around a heavy metal tray. Katie's training kicked in instantly, years of managing unpredictable, occasionally volatile situations surfacing in pure, focused survival instinct. She grabbed the door handle behind her, wrenching it open just as Diane lunged, the tray clattering harmlessly against the closing door instead of connecting with Katie's retreating body. She sprinted down the hallway, adrenaline roaring through her, straight into Marco and two of Vincent's security detail, who'd been discreetly monitoring the facility exactly as promised. She attacked me, Katie said, breathless. In the supply closet. She's still back there. Vincent arrived minutes later, alerted by Marco's immediate call, his composed authority cracking into raw, visible fury the moment he found Katie shaken but unharmed. Are you hurt? Katie, look at me. I'm okay, she managed, adrenaline still roaring through her. She's cornered in the supply closet. Security has her contained. Vincent's expression went completely cold. Then we finish this properly tonight before she has any further chance to escalate. Diane was formally detained by facility security and local police, called in response to the physical altercation, well before the scheduled hearing's formal proceedings even began. You didn't have to confront her personally, the responding officer told Katie, once her statement had been taken. You could have waited for the formal investigation to run its course. I wasn't looking for a confrontation, Katie said. I was just trying to check on a resident I care about. She's the one who chose to escalate. That night, reviewing the sudden acceleration of events with Vincent in his estate's quiet study, Katie found herself processing the full weight of what had almost happened. She could have seriously hurt you, Vincent said, his voice still tight with barely controlled fear that had only just begun to settle. If Marco's team hadn't been positioned exactly where they were. But they were, Katie said. Because you insisted on protection even when I pushed back about needing space to do my own work. That mattered tonight. I should have insisted on protection inside the building itself, Vincent said. Not just around the perimeter. You couldn't have anticipated exactly this, Katie said gently. None of us could have. What matters is what happens next. Vincent studied her, something resolving fully behind his controlled exterior. What happens next, he said, is I make sure this facility and everyone connected to letting this happen faces complete and total accountability. Regardless of what it costs. The formal hearing convened the following week exactly as scheduled, though its scope had expanded considerably given Diane's arrest and the physical confrontation in the supply closet. State licensing officials, Brookline's ownership group and legal representation all gathered to address a scheme that had grown far beyond a single supervisor's misconduct. Katie's testimony formed the evidentiary backbone of the proceedings, her careful months-long documentation laid out methodically alongside the pharmacy records and financial evidence Vincent's investigators had assembled. This pattern, Katie said, addressing the assembled officials directly, her voice steady despite the weight of the room's attention, shows systematic medication diversions spanning at least 8 months, directly correlated with periods of documented resident neglect and physical mishandling. I personally witnessed rough treatment of Frank Lombardi on multiple occasions, treatment that matches exactly the periods when staffing was stretched thinnest covering for Diane Kessler's activities. The ownership group's representative, a composed man named Richard Ashford, listened with visible, mounting discomfort. This is a serious allegation about our facility's operational oversight, he said carefully. We'll need to review this evidence thoroughly before. The evidence is thorough, Vincent said, rising to address the room directly. Financial records connecting Diane Kessler's personal accounts to diverted medication. Medical documentation of unexplained bruising across multiple residents. A physical assault against the very aide who first documented these concerns. This isn't a matter requiring extensive further review. This is a matter requiring immediate accountability. Richard's composure flickered. Mr. Lombardi, your family's investment relationship with this ownership group has been valuable for years. I'd hope we can address this in a manner that doesn't damage that relationship unnecessarily. That relationship is already damaged, Vincent said, something absolute and unwavering in his voice. It was damaged the moment your oversight structure allowed this kind of neglect to continue for 8 months without proper intervention. I'm formally withdrawing my family's investment from this ownership group, effective immediately. The room's collective, sudden tension rippled outward. Richard's face paled visibly. That's a significant financial relationship to sever over one supervisor's misconduct, he said. It's not one supervisor's misconduct, Vincent said. It's an oversight failure that let one supervisor's misconduct continue unchecked for 8 months, harming vulnerable residents who trusted this facility to protect them. I'm not interested in continuing to fund an organization that allowed that failure to happen. The decision that followed cost Vincent considerably more than Diane's exposure alone. Severing his family's investment relationship with Brookline's ownership group represented a significant, painful sacrifice. Years of stable, profitable returns, ended deliberately, specifically because the underlying oversight structure had failed the people it was supposed to protect. This investment has provided consistent returns for nearly a decade, Enzo warned in Vincent's office days after the hearing, financial projections spread across the desk. Severing it entirely rather than simply pushing for internal reforms, costs this family considerable stable income. I know, Vincent said. I'm doing it anyway. Why go that far? Enzo pressed. You could have pushed for reform, kept the underlying financial relationship intact. Because this entire relationship depended on trusting an oversight structure that let my own father be mistreated for months without proper intervention, Vincent said. I'm not interested in continuing to fund that same structure, simply because ending the relationship costs revenue. I'd rather find my father's genuinely excellent care somewhere I can actually trust, than keep profiting from an arrangement that nearly cost vulnerable people their safety and dignity. It was, Katie would understand later, the single most costly decision Vincent made throughout the entire ordeal. Not the confrontation with Diane, but the deliberate, complete withdrawal from a stable, profitable investment relationship, specifically because its underlying oversight had failed exactly the people it was supposed to protect. You didn't have to sever the entire investment, Katie told Vincent, finding him in his office 3 days after the hearing, exhausted in a way she hadn't seen from him before. You could have pushed for internal reforms and kept the financial relationship intact. I could have, Vincent admitted. For years I told myself that maintaining stable, profitable business relationships mattered more than examining whether they were actually built on adequate oversight. Watching Diane nearly hurt you, watching my own father suffer months of mistreatment because I trusted a reputation instead of actually verifying it, that taught me something I should have understood a long time ago. He met her eyes directly. Standing up for the vulnerable, even without recognition, often changes more than we realize. You didn't do any of this expecting reward or acknowledgement. You did it because it was right from that very first moment in the hallway. I don't want to be the kind of man who only acts when there's convenient profit attached to doing the right thing. Katie was quiet a long moment, weighing everything he'd admitted against the fierce independence she'd fought to protect throughout this entire ordeal. I need you to understand something too, she said finally. I'm not interested in staying close to you because I feel like I owe you anything for protecting me or exposing Diane or any of it. I stepped into that hallway because your father deserved patience, not because I expected it to lead anywhere beyond that single moment. I'm not going to let gratitude replace something that has to be chosen freely, not even for you. That's exactly what I want you to understand too, Vincent said. Whatever you choose next, it has to be entirely yours. Diane's formal prosecution moved forward over the following weeks. The evidence Katie and Vincent had assembled together, leaving no room for her scheme to survive scrutiny. Brookline was placed under new independent oversight, with a comprehensive investigation into every resident potentially affected by months of systematic neglect. You didn't have to testify so thoroughly, the investigating attorney told Katie afterward. A less detailed account would have sufficed for the basic charges. She stole medication from vulnerable people and let staff neglect their actual care to prevent that theft, Katie said simply. I wasn't interested in leaving any room for doubt. 2 months later, Katie stood in Frank Lombardi's newly renovated room at Brookline, now operating under entirely new management, with oversight standards Katie herself had helped design as part of the facility's mandatory reforms. Vincent had offered her, more than once, a permanent position managing elder care standards across the facility. Generous, secure, considerably removed from the uncertain, exhausting rhythm of per diem work she'd navigated for the past year. This time she'd accepted, though on terms entirely her own. You're not just staying because I asked you to, Vincent said, watching her review the new care protocols with the same careful, exacting attention she brought to everything. I'm staying because this work actually matters and because I finally have the standing to make sure it's done right, Katie said. That's different from staying because you asked. I know, Vincent said, something warm moving behind his careful expression. I wanted to say it out loud anyway. That evening, sitting with Frank in the estate's garden during a family visit, Katie noticed him fidgeting with something in his lap. His old woolen scarf, worn soft with age, a small tear along one edge from months of rough handling before anyone had properly noticed. I fixed this for you, Katie said, pulling a small sewing kit from her bag, carefully rewoven wool now seamlessly restored along the tear's edge. It seemed important to make sure it stayed whole. Frank's eyes filled, his trembling fingers tracing the careful repair. You've done more for me than fix a scarf, young lady. You deserved patience, Katie said quietly, echoing the words she'd first spoken in that hallway months earlier. That's all this ever was. Vincent watched the exchange from across the garden, something soft and certain settling behind his composed expression. Later that evening, walking together through the estate's quiet grounds, Vincent reached for Katie's hand, deliberate and unhurried, entirely hers to accept or decline. I know I complicated your life, the moment I requested you specifically for my father's care, he said. I've thought about that a lot. Whether any of this actually helped you or whether it just handed you a different, more dangerous version of the same problem. It did complicate things, Katie admitted honestly. But you also listened every single time I pushed back. That's the difference. You didn't just decide for me and expect gratitude. You let me set the terms, even when it clearly would have been easier for you not to, even when severing your family's investment cost you considerably to do this properly. Then let's keep building it that way, Vincent said, together on whatever terms actually work for both of us. She closed the distance between them herself, deliberate and certain, and kissed him. The choice entirely hers, made with eyes open to exactly what it had cost and exactly what it had given her in return. Katie still works at Brookline most days, now overseeing care standards for dozens of residents instead of managing a single per diem assignment. Still carrying the same instinct that first sent her crossing a hallway to defend a stranger's dignity without a second's hesitation. Frank still wears his carefully repaired scarf every single day, a small, steady comfort that survived considerably more than a torn seam. And Vincent Lombardi, a man once known only for the power his name carried, has quietly become known throughout his own family's operations for something else entirely. A boss who finally learned that genuine protection means actually paying attention, not simply providing from a comfortable distance. If this story stayed with you, I want to know what you think. Was Katie right to keep pushing for the full truth even after it cost her job security and put her in real danger? Or should she have let the facility handle the investigation quietly on its own? Tell me your honest answer in the comments and why you believe it. If stories about quiet courage protecting the vulnerable resonate with you, subscribe. The next one is coming soon.